Hey friends, welcome back to the Good Life Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Lamoureux. I'm a podcast coach, a life coach, and the author of Design a Life You Love. This is a show for midlife women who want to live happier, healthier, and more meaningful lives. Today on the show, we are talking about something called productive failure. Joining us today is Dr. Manu Kapur, who is a leading human learning expert, and he reveals how, when, and why failure can be intentionally designed to foster deep learning, creativity, and growth, which is what he wrote about in his book, Productive Failure: Unlocking Deeper Learning Through the Science of Failing. Dr. Kapur is a world-renowned expert on learning and currently heads the Future Learning Initiative at ETH University in Zurich. Dr. Kapur earned his doctorate in education from Columbia University and is known for his pioneering research on intentionally designing for and learning from failure, demonstrating how this approach can lead to more effective learning compared to traditional methods. He has 2 successful TEDx talks, Productive Failure and How Failure Drives Learning. All the show notes will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com or on your podcast player, where you'll also find an invitation to join my community to live your best midlife. On that note, let's get into the show. Here we go. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, and you're in Singapore, and I'm here in San Diego, so it's morning for you and evening for me. And I just really found your book fascinating, and also the work you do. I'm curious, Manu, if I met you at a party and I asked you, what do you do? What do you tell people?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, basically, I'm a researcher on human cognition, and I try to understand how the mind works and how we can use that understanding to make it learn better.
Okay.
That's my superpower, so to speak, if I have one.
Oh, I love that. Well, I think failure is a word that makes people uncomfortable. I think a lot of people get stuck because of a fear of failing. They don't want to even try because they're worried. But you talk about productive failure. So explain to us what's failure by your definition, and what is productive failure, so we have a frame for the conversation we're about to have.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. People get afraid of failure, and I'll get to that point in a little bit. But first, what is productive failure? When you're about to learn something new, say it's some new piece of knowledge, a new skill, or whatever it is that you're trying to. Productive failure is in that zone where you're about to learn something new. You do not know it yet. The default paradigm is, you seek knowledge from an expert or somebody who knows it exactly, right? And that's the telling paradigm. You don't know something, you find somebody who can explain it to you, tell you very clearly, very engagingly. That's the paradigm we're quite used to. And we think that that leads to very deep learning. It turns out it does not. What actually leads to deep learning is to delay that knowledge or instruction or expert communication a bit later, but first start with structured, challenging activities that are designed in ways for you to maybe struggle, maybe explore, maybe ideate, but fail. And then use that background knowledge to learn from the expert. And I think that's the paradigm shift, that it's not just that, failure when it happens can be good for learning. The proposition of productive failure is, if failure is a powerful mechanism for learning, then we shouldn't be waiting for it to happen. It's that intentionality, it's the deliberate way of going about designing and then harnessing failure for your initial learning is what's the difference, what's the key value proposition of productive failure.
Okay, this is great. In your TEDx talk, you said, and I'm going to quote, you said, sometimes you have to lose yourself quite intentionally, quite safely, I hope, so you can find yourself again. This is productive failure. It's funny because when you were talking before we hit record, we were talking about when we're younger. I'm just thinking of when we taught my daughter how to ride her bike. My husband said to her, just know you want to try to fall 10 times before you get this. She fell 3 before she mastered it. But knowing that she was going to fall as part of the process, I think allowed her to take more risk and learn. Is this kind of aligned with what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, your husband, intuitively just did that. And I think if you look at, research in early childhood, right, how children learn a language or learn how to walk or learn how to ride a bicycle, productive failure is at the core of all of these mechanisms. When children feel safe, in this case, your husband made her even safer by very explicitly telling her that, look, you're going to fall, and that's normal. And that's
Yeah.
something we do in productive failure. But when you design a safe space, and children, hopefully for the most part, I hope have this safe space, they're really good explorers. They just try and it doesn't work out. They get up again and they try again without thinking. It is part of who we are because failure is a very powerful mechanism for learning. And you look at one of the steepest learning curves happen in the first 7 years, right?
Mhm.
And productive failure is at its core. Somehow, after that, we get socialized and culturated into a different way, a different norm for failure, where failure suddenly becomes bad. The psychological space around you no longer says it's okay to fail when you're learning something new.
Yeah.
It, it and when these things happen, when the space changes, the environment changes, the expectation changes, you get socialized into thinking that, oh, I shouldn't be failing if I'm learning, right? And I think that's
Yes.
the difference here. We want to bring those basic mechanisms, the powerful mechanisms of failure, back into not just the schooling years, but higher education and lifelong learning, because those are the really powerful mechanisms. Yeah.
Tell us how you came to this work. I know you open the book and you talk about how you wanted to be a professional soccer player and suffered an injury and steps led you down a path.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how did this become your vocation and the work that you became passionate about and now have written this book about?
I think it all made sense looking back, really.
Yes.
I didn't design for it to. I mean, if at 15 you'd asked me you'd be a professor one day, I'd laugh at you, right? So, or
Yes.
a teacher, or an engineer. I mean, I did all of those things on route to becoming a professor, and then I chose a topic for my research that has to do with learning. So these are not designed in any a priori way that I had a vision to do this. No. I think I just these life experiences, having failed it as an athlete, having failed it as an engineer, then teacher, and then became an academic. I think just as long as you keep pursuing and you're true to yourself as to okay, I want to do this next thing, that perhaps maybe that's the thing that I'm really going to be good at. It's that exploration, that drive, always not being comfortable with where you are in a very productive way. And that's kind of led me to a research career. And now I use failure as the basic core mechanism of learning. Yeah.
It's curious though, because I wonder if you'll be using this for a next step at some point too. I don't know how long you've been doing it, but yeah, it just
Yes. I
makes
mean,
me
I'm
think, yes,
I'm almost 2 decades into my academic career, right? And now I've taken on this role where I'm running this huge center, which is not just on learning, but it's more expansive than that. Um, and I'm still learning how to be a leader, and how to manage teams, how to manage large teams, and so on and so
Mm,
forth, and organizations. So it's always, if you're looking for growth, you've got to put yourself in that zone where your current knowledge and skill sets are not sufficient. That's the basic logic. I mean, Vygotsky called it the zone of proximal development. It's the failure zone. So if you think about it, if what you're trying to learn and if you're trying to do certain tasks or activities and you're able to do them fully, completely, and you're successful, I tell everybody, don't be too happy about it.
mm,
Because if you only have success in your repertoire, that means you've not pushed yourself enough. It doesn't mean you're failing all the time, but it's a signal that the failure, you have to have a failure signal in your life, at least on some things. And as long as that failure is not due to laziness, incompetence, stupidity, right? We're not talking about those. As long as it's a genuine failure because you tried something that was hard, something that was uncomfortable, something that was challenging, that's when you get into the failure zone. And when failure happens, tell yourself, like your husband did to your daughter, it's okay. The failure is the expectation here. How do I go about designing my growth? How do I go
yeah,
about designing my learning? Having chosen that this is the thing that I want to do
I
or
see.
learn, right? And there, the design question comes in, and you say, okay, if I want to learn something new, Do I immediately access the information and learn it, or do I go through the productive failure route? And it turns out intentionally designing for failure initially and then getting the information is actually a lot more powerful. So it's post prioritization, I would say. Yeah.
It's interesting. Could you give us an example that might be relatable for the women listening of how to design this, whether they're encouraging their child who's looking to, I don't know, do something with their career, or the woman herself who might be either launching a product, a company, or in transition? You pick whatever. I just gave many examples, but what?
Yeah, I mean, if you're helping your child learn something new, I think we have this, and I'll give you a couple examples. Yeah, if you're helping a child learning something new, it's very easy to, really go directly into telling and helping them fully. Let me just show you how to do it. I think, managing this impulse and say, just holding back a little bit of your knowledge before, and letting the child tinker and explore a little bit, create that space. I think that's really powerful. Again, going back to what your husband did with your daughter, but more so generally in the schooling years. I think giving children a chance to first explore and tinker, even if it fails, in a safe way, and then sharing with them the knowledge. I think should be the basic mantra of how we bring up deep learning, children who learn better, learn well. Then, I mean, at work, when you say, I deal with entrepreneurs a lot as well,
Yes.
right? And I think in the startup world, in the early years, at least, failure is it's the norm, right? You're trying out multiple ideas, multiple product lines, multiple ways. You're user testing all the time, getting feedback. So I think in that part, failure just naturally happens. I guess people also expect it, so nobody worries about it so much. People are not. I think they take it well. What happens? The transition I see is when the startup goes into a more stable mode. Suppose you're starting to see some success come out of it.
Yes.
Right. That's the tricky part, because as you're growing, as you're becoming more and more successful, you somehow lose that, and the thing that got you there. Right. And it's not to say that the same thing would work in the next phase of your growth, but it's to say that you have to constantly innovate, even as you're becoming successful. Right.
Yes.
And there I ask leaders and entrepreneurs to always have a failure signal in their portfolio. So yes, you're running a company, you're trying to make a profit, but are you also innovating? Are you also creating new ideas? And are you also pushing the boundaries? And if in your teams, in your startups, in your businesses, there's no failure signal, that means people are trying things and they're not working out. That's what a failure signal is. If you don't have evidence of that, and if you're not actively seeking and measuring that in addition to your bottom line, then you're not setting yourself up to competition and success.
Yeah. And is that also for the founder to not be micromanaging, and just like with the parent to the child is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think it's about setting goals, and also, when we have appraisals or performance appraisals or conversations about, performance and growth with your employees, it's not just about the key areas. It's also about, I like to have a conversation always with my team members, with my employees about, oh, look, tell me, what are the things you've tried, challenging things you've tried this year that have not worked? I can see all the things that have worked, but let's talk about the things that, and if the answer to this question is null or the person does not know, I immediately am alarmed, because that is not the kind of, alarmed at two levels. It's not good for the employee, right? Because they have not had opportunities to actually take on challenges and grow. Because without that, it's not going to happen. And I'm alarmed for the team or the organization. That means we've just missed an opportunity. We hire the smart people, the best people, and then they are not experimenting. What's the point of it?
Right.
Right. And so on both levels, I try to design or have a conversation about failure, and then to see whether I can detect this or pick up this signal, the failure signal, because then I feel comfortable that something good is happening. Even if I have no full control over it, that's fine. But at least something good is happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like you said earlier, people are conditioned at some point after they turn 7 or 8 to not want to do that. And so even though you're giving them permission and you're actually encouraging it, and your whole framework is set up that way, the
Yeah.
old patterning maybe comes in.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And we've got to shift that, and as leaders, you need to do that. You are the one. Don't expect it that it'll happen naturally. You have to do it. You have to have this conversation. You have to be very explicit about the expectations. So when we work in schools or training situations, we are very first thing we said, we are going to take you through a challenge. You are not going to be able to solve it. We are not interested in whether you're able to solve it. What we're interested in, how do you approach it? What ideas you generate? How do you work together? Forget about getting it right. It is very, very explicit, you know, and then you persist with those kinds of expectations. And even then, people might not believe it initially because they're just
Yes,
not used to it. So you've got to persist over time. And this kind of culture shift takes a long time.
absolutely. I think when you have like people who are high achievers too, it's hard
Mhm.
for them to want to say, I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's one of the groups that resists this the most
Yes,
because they've always got it right. They've always been able to do it, and now you're changing the game and say, "What? I'm not going to be able to do this."
right,
I don't like it.
right. Well, you share a story in the book where you went through this a little bit too, with some problem solving where you were sort of set up. Can you tell us that story? Because I think it
Yeah,
might
sure.
be it paint an
I think you're
interesting
referring
picture.
to my engineering days, and this is
Yes,
I had to do
yes.
a thesis in my final year, and I like math, so my professor gave me a problem, engineering thesis that had a mathematical equation at the heart of it, and said, "Go solve it," and that's your thesis. So I went about trying to make it work, and I couldn't solve it. I went back to the professor, said, "I've tried, these ideas," and he says, "Oh, okay, have you tried this? Now try this thing," and he gives me an idea, and I go and try that. And I find that that doesn't work. So I go back to him after a month of trying his idea, by the way. And he says, "Oh, okay, fine. Why don't you try yet another idea?" Right. And then I said, "Okay, fine." So I go back again. I try it. It doesn't work. And this goes on for 3 or 4 times. And I'm running out of time. I need to graduate. My scholarship was running out.
Oh,
And I go
wow.
to him and says, "Look, I've tried everything that even you have said I should try, and they still don't work. What am I to do? I'm panicking." He said, "Manu, look, everything I've asked you to do is known not to work." Right?
So
And
frustrating.
I was so angry and livid, right? What do you mean? We've just wasted 6 months trying things that do not work. I said, "Yeah." I said, "Why did we do that?" He says, "Now you understand the problem better. You've poked at it in so many different ways. You understand the problem better. And now if I told you how to that the problem cannot be solved mathematically, it has to be solved, it has to be programmed, it has to have a computational solution, you'd be able to do it very quickly." I was angry with him, but
Course.
I was done and dusted within a couple of weeks after that because just ran the simulation, boom, done. So and that was like, again, at the time, I wasn't thinking, this is 15 years before productive failure happened,
Wow.
right? So
You
this is so these are the kinds of experiences that even when you go through them, you don't quite like them, but on hindsight, you say, yeah, actually, that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, you went back and connected those dots, and it all does
Exactly.
make sense because you're realizing the value of what you've produced and you're putting out there too. So,
Yeah.
how do we normalize risk taking as part of the problem solving process? So how do we normalize it by,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean it's about intentionally designing for it in our daily lives, right? So whether you're a teacher, an educator, or a leader, or a parent, you normalize it by actually taking action. We don't change mindsets just, okay, now change. No, you have to act in the world. You have to do something about it. So change your practices within your family, within your own learning and growth, with your friends, with your colleagues. And if you change these practices along productive failure principles, where you first take on exploration, you take on challenges, then everybody also sees around you, oh, my mom is taking on challenges, my father is taking on challenges, my friends are taking on challenges. It's everything, this kind of approach then becomes a norm.
yeah,
That's what the action is, what is needed that to make it the norm. Because the current way we act results in a different kind of a norm where failure is completely unacceptable, right? But
hmm,
if you act in ways that everybody starts to, design their own productive failure experiences for themselves and for others, then we see around ourselves, oh, that's the normal way to be. Just like a child around other children. yeah, everybody is, exploring, falling, getting up, doing things. Well, that's what I should do too.
Yes.
And the best part is we know how to do this. We have done this for, 7, 8, 10 years of our lives. We know how to do this. We just
Yeah.
have to do it again.
We have to do it again. And modeling it is interesting because I started this podcast. I'm going on the 6th year now. My daughter's
Hmm.
seen me grow it and where it's gone. And, when I've had the self-doubt and all these things, my husband's an entrepreneur. He's got a
Mhm.
startup. He's about 6 years in, and
Right.
she's seeing our daily sort of roller coasters. And
Hmm.
I think I'm always very transparent about
Yeah.
what I'm feeling and stuff. But self-doubt or the sense of like imposter syndrome or like questioning, like, why am I doing this? Because sometimes you have that innate like knowing
Hmm.
about something,
Hmm.
but then
Yeah.
oh, I've invested this much time. How do I know where I am on this level of success? How am I measuring it? How do you kind of navigate those spaces? Because I think that can be tricky.
Yeah.
I
No,
come
I
up
mean,
against that
yeah.
often.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of ways that one is from just purely from a philosophical view. I've felt the imposter syndrome from time to time. I still feel every time I take on a new role or a new challenge, I feel, well, do I belong here? I mean, you look around, people are doing amazing things in your networks, and you say, oh, what am I up to? So it is a very normal feeling. So first thing is imposter syndrome is more common than not. Like everybody's, if you're not feeling it, then there's something wrong, and not just with you, but maybe you're just not pushing yourself. So that's the
Yes.
philosophical view, right? My dad used to say, um, your talent, your ambition should always exceed your talent.
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful. Will you say that again?
Your ambition should always exceed your talent.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that.
And because I had this conversation about feeling like an imposter from time to time, I said, as long as you're always on a growth trajectory where your ambition exceeds your talent, you're learning, and you'll always surround yourself with people, or people would naturally be in your environment who are doing amazing things. And that would make you feel like an imposter. But those are precisely the learning opportunities. That's where you really grow. That's where you really push yourself, right? So, and I
Hmm.
think, and it's even if I say this, I mean, even after he told me, it made me feel better. You still feel it, and so you really have. No, that's normal, right? That's the
Yes.
normal,
No, I
normal
understand.
psychological. And when you feel it, you feel bad. I mean, it's just working on yourself over time to say, that's how mind shifts also happen. To say what I'm feeling is the right thing. It's the psychologically. I think what we attribute to that is, oh, this is a bad thing to feel. And I think what we need to work on is to say, if I'm feeling this, acknowledge it and say, that is the right thing I should be feeling. It is psychologically normal that I'm feeling. There's nothing wrong with me that I'm feeling this. I think once we're able to make that attribution that, oh, it is actually normal that I feel like an imposter, then that helps. It still feels bad, but at least it helps. The science aspect of that is, the work on emotions and affective states. We're so used to thinking that, all learning and growth should be happy and fun, and, we should be engaging. But, we've studied the emotional, you were talking about the roller coaster of emotional dynamics, right? And even
Yes.
in learning situations, in productive failure contexts, we've studied this and we found that, all the positive emotions do not correlate always with positive learning. And negative emotions do not necessarily correlate with negative learning. There are sometimes negative emotions actually correlate with positive deep learning and vice versa.
Hmm.
So in the moment when a person is struggling, when a person is failing, when they feel bad or shame or guilt that they're not able to do this problem or challenge, in that moment, that is actually that emotion itself is a powerful mechanism for learning. Feeling that,
Hmm.
and why? Because negative emotions carry a much bigger charge than positive emotions. It's just how our brain is evolved. If you bootstrap that emotion in a safe way, which is what productive failure tries to do, right? Then you're basically encoding that information very strongly, very deeply, and you remember it. And so
Yes.
I say negative emotions can be productive for learning. And productive failure provides you a way to design for it in a safe way.
Yes. Assuming you don't let the negative emotions get you stuck.
Exactly. Or, take you down a path where it debilitates you, right? And
Right.
I think that's where understanding what I hope the understanding, what and part of what I hope to achieve with this book is, if you understand the science behind it,
Hmm.
maybe you start to think that you make the shift that this is normal. Because right now people think it's not normal.
Yes.
The science supports it and says this is normal. This is what most people go through when they're taking on productive failure challenges for their learning and growth. Then maybe if I'm feeling it, it's fine because that's how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And if the people around you are also allowing themselves to do this, then, like you said, it becomes the norm and you're
Exactly.
not the outlier. Currently, I feel like, at least in the United States, a lot of the entrepreneurs or whatever, a lot of times they are seen as the risk takers or more of the outliers. They're not, you need a little bit of not a little, you need a certain temperament, I think, and an ability to have productive failure, to ride that.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yes, and it's not, you don't have to, be an entrepreneur. Like you can have the entrepreneur with the small e. You can be entrepreneurial in your daily life. And if
Mm,
you choose that those are the things you want to focus on. Of course, we are creatures of habit. Routines help us. So we need some kind of, routine, some things that we do without thinking, but there are certain things we want to learn and grow. Right? And
yeah.
those things we can be intentionally entrepreneurial. We don't have to start a business, but maybe you need to start learning something new,
Mm,
something small. So it is designing your life in a way that you're entrepreneurial is just as effective as taking on a big project or just doing a startup or changing or pivoting in a major way. It's the small ways as well as the big ways, and I would say the small ways are far safer a way to embody the spirit of the mantra, as I call it, the mantra of productive failure, than the big ones.
I'm so grateful you just said that. Actually, my book is called Design a Life You Love. And the invitation with this podcast is, in fact, just what you're saying. It's, if you want to do the business, go do the business. But how about taking a class again?
Exactly.
Learning that language, it basically reintegrating more of yourself into your life for more joy and
Mhm.
sense of meaning and
Yeah.
fun. And fun. What
Yeah.
about fun, right,
Yeah.
Manu?
Exactly. Have fun. Yeah. 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 And you will find that as you take on these challenges or take on these new growth trajectories, yes, it's good to have fun, but also expect that a certain amount of struggle would happen, and try to sort of renorm it as saying, well, this is the price of fun. This is what happens. This is the
Yes.
norm. This is the normal thing that I'm experiencing. One of the conversations I had with my students, these are bachelor students at the university, when they took a course on the science of failure with me, and they started looking back at their education, how their teachers were teaching all these years. It says, actually, I've just realized that there was hardly any, I mean, these are high performing students.
Yes.
There was actually no failure in my life. I've always been able to do it. And does it mean that I could have been I could have been even higher had people really challenged me, put me in those spaces. And these are very high performing students themselves realizing the price of success or early success. And they're saying, well, maybe our education should have been different. So, yeah.
Well, we started before the mics went on. I was asking you. So, in terms of, so tell us, there was the different learning styles, because you said there's an example in the book where you talk about, you give one group of kids, a toy, and you say, is that the directive learning, where you say, this
Yeah,
is how you use this toy, and
exactly.
the second group gets the toy, and they're allowed to just explore and figure out what to do with it. Tell us about this experiment.
So these are, I mean, I put it down as a thought experiment in the book, but these are actual experiments with children that people have done.
Yes.
And experiments typically go like this. Suppose you have a new toy, and to some group of children, you say, well, here's a new toy. You've never seen it. You've never played with it. And you say, well, do you want to play with it? And, children want to play with toys. So you give it to them, say, okay, play as you like. And I observe how you play. To another group of children, you say, oh, here's the same new toy. You've never seen it. Do you want to play with it? So we'll say, yeah, I want to play with it. And then you say, okay, wait, but this is a new toy. You've never seen or played with it. Let me show you how to first play with it. And then you show them how to play with it. And after that, you give it to them and say, now you know how to play with it, but I want you to play as you like, just like the other group, right? So basically, both groups are now free to explore and play as they like. The second group actually has more knowledge. They even know how to play with the toy, right? Or the
Yes.
correct thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And every time you've studied, you found that, which is the group that spends more time on the toy or is more engaged. It's always the first group, which is the group that tries to figure out or invent strategies to figure out how the toy works. It's always the first group. So, and when you start to take these experiments, and they basically show that if you try to learn something new, if you give the knowledge too early, you kind of put people in a little box where they find it hard to get out of, right? And then you think about how we learn in schools and universities, and even in companies, how corporate training programs are designed. It's never group one. It's not the first group. It's always the second. This is a new piece of software. This is a new concept. This is a new idea. This is a new process. Let me just tell you what to do, right? And once you do that, yes, people are able to do that thing that they've just learned, but they're just not able to get out of that box. And creativity and innovation is always about getting out of that box, right? And so that's what productive failure tries to do, is to marry group one, the initial exploration, the initial tinkering, the initial failing, and saying, once you've done that, let me then show you how to do it. Because then there are four things that happen, and I call them the four A's.
Yes. I was going to ask you about this, please.
Yeah. So the four A's of productive failure, which is activation, awareness, affect, and assembly. So activation is simply the idea that when you're learning something new, you need to activate your own knowledge to make sense of the new information. If you don't have any knowledge to make sense of the new information, you won't be able to process it. So if I suddenly start speaking Mandarin right now, no matter how smart you are, unless have some background, you just will not be able to understand what I'm saying, right?
Right.
Learning concepts and ideas, these are all new languages, basically. Right? It's a new way of new construct, new grammars, new ways of putting things together. So they're all new languages. And if you don't have any background knowledge, you would not be able to process it. So what helps us activate our knowledge? Well, by trying something and failing. That really helps us activate. Oh, this is what I think I know.
Yes.
And it doesn't work.
Yes.
So that's the first A, the activation. The second A is the awareness. So when you've tried something or tried a few things and all of them don't work, you develop an awareness that here's the limit of what I know in relation to where I want to go. There's an awareness, there's a gap. And that awareness is itself, and we've studied that, is a very powerful mechanism, because that creates an affect in two ways. One is the positive affect. I really want to bridge that gap.
Yes.
Right. And the negative affect is, oh my God, I have a gap. I can't believe I'm struggling. And again, we talked about next. So you'll feel negative emotions too, that, oh, I was not able to do this. I feel shame. I feel guilty that I'm not able to do this. So and both are felt at the same time, and both are necessary for powerful learning. So you've got your knowledge activated, you're aware of a gap, and you've got this, I call it the affective state that is primed for assembly. And if at that point, an expert or a teacher or a mentor or somebody who's more knowledgeable comes in and shows you the correct way, or puts it all together for you, that's what makes the initial failure productive. Right? Those are the four A's.
And that's the safe space. I was going to ask you about that too, both the four steps from that you've written about in the book, but also in that safe space that you're creating. Yes, at what point can you, or is it good to seek out that help, or yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you're making. It's not about productive failure. Is not about doing things on your own. It's about the expert knowledge, or having a canonical set of resources, or people who know more, who could potentially teach you, mentor you, guide you. These people are very important. You need this set of, you need this community. You must always have that. What productive failure says is before you reach out, before you're too quick to get to that, try and engage yourself like the group one, the children we talked about. Try and engage yourself in intentionally designed activities that lead to failure or exploration. And then you reach out. So it's the combination of both. So it's not just, oh, go figure out yourself. That's not what productive failure is about. That doesn't work very well, by the way. Also in research, right? Discovery learning, pure discovery learning doesn't work very well. It's when you combine it with knowledge at the right time. There's a classic paper in my field. It's called A Time for Telling.
Okay.
So, telling is obviously important. Like, finding out the correct information is obviously important. Expert knowledge is important, but there is a time for it. Even when you're talking to your kids or you say tutoring, sometimes we help our kids with math or science or English when we're tutoring them. There's enough research now that suggests if you give an explanation as you're tutoring, if you tell your child, oh, this is how you do it, and if you give this explanation at a time that they are not stuck, it does not lead to learning. But if you give the same instruction or explanation at the time where the child is done, you see that, oh, they can't go any further. They're actually at an impasse or a stop. If you give the same thing, then they learn it. So that's how it's not. So I hope your audience does not go away with the impression that, oh, just go figure out something yourself and that's productive failure. No, it's creating that moment, creating that initial space where you explore and fail and get stuck in a safe way. And then you go for the knowledge. Then you seek instruction. Then you seek mentoring because you've tried it and then you're ready.
It makes so much sense. And I'm relating, I'm thinking about some situations in my own life and I'm like, just nodding. I'm like, yes, that makes so much sense. You talk about in the book, the power of curiosity. I think curiosity is a superpower. And, it's what we were talking about with the kids and their desire. One of my core values, I don't even know if technically it is a core value, but one that I'm focused on for this year as part of my path beyond creativity and re-embracing that in my life is expansion. The word expansion keeps coming to me. And I think curiosity is that path to expansion. I just love your thoughts on where curiosity fits into all of this.
Yeah, I think we're used to thinking that some people are curious and other people are not so much, right? And in productive failure, we take a different perspective. It says curiosity is something you design for. Again,
Yes.
that intentional design comes in always in my thinking. So,
Yes.
so how do you design for curiosity? How do you design for curiosity? And one of the ways you design for curiosity is by making people fail in a safe way. Because it's that part of the awareness because when you have an awareness of a gap, you become curious as to what is this correct thing? What is this new knowledge? What is this new way of thinking that I'm not able to get? That curiosity then kicks in because you designed for it. If you
Yes.
show a child what they, give them something and it's very evident to them they're not able to, they want to learn. They're curious what the next thing is, right? So that's how you intentionally design for it. And one of the most amazing things about curiosity is that it's like a switch. If you activate it in one context, research is starting to show that you become generally curious as well. In the
Okay.
sense that even things that you're not looking to learn, you become more of a sponge.
That's me. Yeah. I can
Yeah.
relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it has a much stronger effect than the original intentional design that you had. Like your original goal for learning was to make them curious to learn that thing. But
Yes.
once they're in a curious state, you have that absorptive effect that you can learn a lot more of things that you didn't even plan to learn. Whether that's a good thing or not, but that's the idea. A curious brain, in other words, is a very powerful, and we can design for it.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question sort of along this line, which is parents who have kids who are graduating college and
Mm,
going out into the world. Some of them have a fixed idea of where they're going to go, right?
mm,
Or have thought, like, I'm going to go to law school. I'm smart. This is what I'm
mm,
supposed to do, kind of mindset, or whatever the
mm.
path may look like. How can they use this to design for productive failure while getting themselves onto that path, or is that too simplistic? Maybe that's not the way to be thinking of it. I'd like your thoughts on.
So I have a 22-year-old who's in college right
Oh, well,
now, and
perfect.
and I've asked him to say, look, your goal for the 20s is to design as many learning experiences as
Mm,
diverse as possible, so you get to find out what you really want to do.
mm,
No, so it's like there will be some basically saying follow, and he has to acknowledge his privilege, and I think he does that. He has the safe space and the means to be able to design his 20s in this way. Not everybody gets to do that. But I
yes.
think it's a shame, given that he has the means, that he still does not do it. That is a sin for me, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's see. And I think to the extent that people can design or help their children have this kind of design for them, or give them the space within which they could design these choices for themselves. I think diversity of experiences and skills is the most important thing, because that pushes and probes you in ways that you understand yourself.
Yes.
And then you get to decide later on, what you really want to do. There are also people who converge very early, and they can run with it. There's nothing wrong with that if you know what you want to do. But if you don't know what you want to do, I
Yes.
don't think it's a bad thing either. I think it's a really good thing if you have the means to explore. And yeah, I don't ask him to converge. He will figure it. I didn't converge until I was in my early 30s.
Yes.
So, and we were under a lot of pressure to converge, because my parents didn't have the means to support that. Right? But we somehow went through it because life happened that way. But for the next generation, yes, absolutely. If you have the means to explore, to have diversity of experiences, use that time to really experience a number of things, and then decide what you really want to do.
Yes. I love it. And for the women who are in midlife who are listening, who are also maybe in a transition, career transition, trying to figure out their next steps, same advice?
Absolutely. I mean, I've transitioned so many times as well. Each time people have said, you've spent so much time figuring this out and building your career in this, as an engineer, as a teacher, why do you want to change it? Why don't you double down on it and go down this trajectory? And I've always said, at the moment I become too comfortable in something, I feel that I'm not growing, I'm not getting new challenges, I have to pivot. It's
Yes.
it's what I call, being comfortable. Don't be comfortable with being too comfortable. I guess.
Yes.
And or
Yes.
become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And everybody has their own sort of switch where that happens. Uh,
Yes.
I think that's really important, to pivot, to try new things.
Yes. Your book is fantastic. I love this conversation. I'm just going to ask you, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to make sure the women take away from what we're talking about today?
No, I think all the questions were great. I just want to, maybe describe or sort of emphasize the real sort of the shift that I hope that this book would hopefully do. It's really not to wait for failure to happen. When you're learning something new, I hope this book will help people understand why we need to deliberately design for it, and what does it mean to design for it, and what is the science behind it, because maybe that also gives people some comfort that this is not just an opinion. This is not just a motivational thing. It's actual solid science behind it, that if you go this route, you actually grow and learn a lot deeper. So,
And retain what you're learning too. That's another
absolutely.
takeaway from the book. The retention's there too.
Yeah, you go back. I mean, this is not even rocket science, right? You go back in your life and you think about what are the things you really remember. Chances are there was struggle, there was failure, there were some deep emotions involved there. Uh,
For
no,
better or worse, yes.
exactly,
I
exactly.
think that sounds like a life well lived, though. When you look back, I always say when you're 85, you want to look back and feel like you've lived a really full life. And
Yeah,
that's not going to come from, uh,
exactly. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, and philosophically, right? I mean, if you live such a safe life that you never fail, then by definition you have failed.
yes.
Right? That's basically the point you were saying. At 85, if you live, so I've never failed in my life, Bill. That
Yeah,
means you've
who
never
did you live for?
started.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Did you live the life you desired to live? Yes, I've loved this conversation. I think it's fascinating in the work that you do. This is why I kind of asked you, how do you introduce yourself with all the different things you've done and what you're doing now? Where should I direct the women listening to learn more? Is it your website? Where do you like to have
Yeah, I
people
mean,
find
it's the
you?
book, my website, manukapur.com. The book has its own website as well, productivefailure.com, and through the various social media channels as well. So
Okay, perfect. And all of those will be on the show notes on your podcast player or over at thegoodlifecoach.com. And you can link to it very easily. Manu, thank you for taking the time and to
thank
be
you,
here
Michelle.
today. This has been such a pleasure. And it's given me, and I know my audience now, when they hear this, a lot to think about and to shift maybe how we've been approaching how we're taking our day to day.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for making time and having me on your show. So thank you.
Thank you. Hey friend, I have one request before we sign off today. If you've gained any value from any of the interviews that you've tuned into, would you take just 1 minute and leave a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts? It's actually how more women can find the show, and I want to continue growing a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you for all of your support, and I look forward to being back with you next week. Bye for now.
This podcast is presented for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental health, or other professional advice. Seek out your trusted healthcare provider or other qualified professional for all matters dealing with your health and well-being. Any opinions or information provided by a guest are their own and not those of Michele Lamoureux or the company.